Right. So, welcome everybody. Thank you very much for coming and getting into our little hot house here. I was briefly introduced, but suffice it to say, I'm part of the team at Fabric Ventures, so especially thankful for you all joining us. And especially thankful because, of course, I stand between you and lunch, I think. Also stand between me and lunch. This is also important. But I think we have like about 25 minutes. A lot of you probably think that already kind of the internet and the web has had a pretty fundamental impact on your lives. But we would suggest at Fabric that actually you ain't seen nothing yet, and that the impact of this next phase is going to have a fundamental impact across politics, across your personal life, the very fabric indeed of society, and that one way of thinking about that is to follow the money, as the age-old saying goes, and to look at how capitalism is going to be impacted by this next wave, and understand some of, or share some of our thinking in that space. So this is a little piece of art that actually was constructed in honor of the dreamers in the States, those folks who were brought to the United States as children, and there might have had, or might still have, their kind of fortunes dashed by a kind of a very jagged Sharpie signature at any point in time. Oh, sorry, someone was appearing on my screen. They're playing with it. I think what it represents is that what is at the very core of being human is that desire to dream. And indeed, I've been messing around trying to build and back companies in the technology space for the last 25 years, and dreaming of doing that at the 10 years before that, and started, in fact, with my first company with my brother Charlie. We can all think of the things of which we dream. We think of, happiness, of course, and fun, and we think of sustainable future for the planet, fairness amongst our kind of fellow women and men, but the truth is, and we can actually tether those to the UN sustainability goals, and I've sort of got my badge on. But the truth is that whether or not that's achievable is down to the individual, the individual is the unit at which sort of everything occurs. It is important that we embrace the power of the individual, the diversity of the individual, the ability of the individual to know what that woman or man is up to, and to master the risks involved in that, even in this particular instance. But I think it goes beyond that it is the voice of that kind of sovereign individual that can actually animate beings and can restructure the tyrannical order of the world when that becomes necessary. So pretty critical. But it is also true that collectively, we can achieve a lot more. That if we come together in companies of women and men, that can be more effective. And so it came to pass in 1494, I believe, that Luca Pacioli published a book called Summa di Arithmetica, which is this book here, which captured the extremely interesting topic of double-entry bookkeeping for the first time, along with other principles of the firm and of companies. And so this is seen by many as the kind of advent of capitalism. And actually, if you care to kind of also join in capitalism of another form, I think tomorrow, in fact, you can buy a copy of this book in an auction at Christie's for a couple of $1 million. So get there quickly. You can get your phones out and put in a sort of a remote bid. With Bitcoin, probably. Christie's are pretty advanced. So then the next thing that happened, there was a gentleman called Jean-Baptiste Say who actually encapsulated the primacy of markets in a book he published in 1803, and that these markets should remain free and unfettered. And you could get to the end of the last century, and there are a few of us in this room who would remember quite distinctly when Francis Fukuyama pronounced the end of history with the victory of Western liberal democracy and capitalism over at least the Soviet communist empire. We should be enjoying this very extreme form of capitalism that we all live within. We should be enjoying the fact that almost half of our world's population lives under the benevolent dominion of Emperor Zuck and Facebook. We should also be enjoying the fact that half of the purchases that take place online pass through this sort of trumped up bookstore. We should be also enjoying the fact that essentially every single thought that we have almost, because we believe, perhaps not always justifiably, that what we type into Google is not being observed, whether that is a whim or a fear or personal insecurity or even a potentially malevolent intent, that's all goes into Google, and we should be enjoying that. But do we feel like this is the future of which we dreamed? Is it not true that we're all feel a little bit like we have become the product ourselves? That we have given up our data and become enslaved to these networks? Or indeed, if we're not the product ourselves, we're being co-opted to purchase products, often plastic products, that we shouldn't be buying. This is perhaps not the future that we were all after. On top of that, there's another wave going on, targeted by this gentleman, Andrew Yang, who identified in what he believes was the kind of fundamental reason that the current president was elected, that is to say, the kind of hollowing out of jobs within Middle America, initially through the automation of manual tasks, but obviously, as we know, and we can probably see on many stages here in these few days, is moving up into repetitive tasks through from knowledge workers, and will very soon, of course, encompass even very specialized skills, so from kind of white-collar jobs even to gold-collar jobs. And I think what is already happening there, I don't think this is even a phrase, but let's call them steel-collar jobs, jobs that could never have been done by people, but are now being done by, if you will, machines. So this is a very big issue. And I think maybe even the biggest issue is that, and it's been oft referred to as a kind of an echo chamber, that when we find ourselves in a situation where our emotions are so distorted by the everyday experiences we have in our kind of digital realm, that we're not actually in a good position to even judge whether or not we're being deceived and dragged in the wrong direction. Our reason has perhaps even left us, and many people who otherwise are sort of civilized and well-intended get dragged into wasting time on Instagram and show-ponying around, or suffer real fear from the prospect of opening their inbox and looking at the emails that are attacking them there. So it's wrong at a pretty fundamental level. So that's fine and well and good, but why is it that we might be at some kind of tipping point in this? So, look, I don't want to be too trite and to bash Zuck. That's not what I'm here to do. He's done an incredible job in all sorts of amazing ways of building a company that has benefited a lot of people. But it is true that he is now being dragged up in front of Congress. That is true that the antitrust authorities are looking at not just his company, but many of the tech titans to address what's going on here. Is it too monopolistic? It is true that finally we're seeing GDPR within Europe protecting EU citizens wherever they are in the digital sphere and around the world. And of course, in terms of hacks and the danger to our kind of personal and private data, that's become so frequent as to become a little bit boring and normalized. But fundamentally, there's an extreme form of capitalism here that has evolved that needs tempering, not throwing out, but tempering, and to fight some of those self-reinforcing effects. So dreams are good. Dreams have led us here, but how can we rethink the way in which we organize ourselves in pursuit of those dreams perhaps to do a slightly better job. So let's cast our minds back a little bit. I don't think any of us quite remember here. Or there could be some combination of Glastonbury and Burning Man, or that kind of. If we cast our minds back a little bit, sort of Paleolithic, hunter-gatherer kind of times, in that village or that tribe, there were a couple of characteristics I want to point to. Well, first of all, folks didn't specialize particularly. They covered a number of different bases. You were fishing, you were hunting, you were gathering, you were protecting, you were laying the fire. There were many things you had to do. You were a small unit. And it was a very agile organization. If opportunities came up or challenges, you just reorganized to address them rapidly, and you trusted everybody in that village very implicitly. Now, we moved then into cities, and at city scale, it was possible for the economies, or the economics rather, to work for specialization. And it became necessary at that scale also for there to be intermediaries, to be third parties that you relied upon to trust, in order to interact and transact with other people in that city. This was driven by technological advances, obviously like transport and et cetera, et cetera. And that concept of a city and those trusted third parties was further magnified by the advent of the internet. But what we really ended up with was a global city with all of the benefits, but all of the downsides of that in addition. And so what we believe is that, how we organize ourselves is also another defining characteristic of us as a species. And that whilst Web 1 and Web 2 has magnified and scaled up the city to the globe, what Web 3 can do, and I've actually added here a fourth wave of computing in honor of some of the really fantastic presentations that have taken place over the last couple of days on sort of the core technologies around this. What this phase can do can help us organize in a different way and actually move from a situation where we have to explicitly engineer trust between parties to one where we can implicitly trust any participant in a network, returning us to some of those benefits of agility that we had in the village. So therefore constructing this global village. So that sounds good. But I think it goes importantly beyond that, because at the heart of that move towards Web 3 is not just that ability to organize, through those implicit trust bonds, but it's also that you create this new human-centric personal identity that you can carry with you. And what we believe that will help unlock is the vast quantity of data that is now being produced in this new wave of computing. So in fact, the quantity of data that's being produced is way outstripping our ability to find, not just a bunch of data, it's not about big data, but it's about the right data at the right time for a specific problem and with the right level of currency. Data, it decays, it has a half-life. And so we think those technologies are going to help us significantly with tackling that. And you might ask, well, why does that matter? Well, if you could organize yourself and you've got the right data that you can access and algorithms can access, we can hopefully build a whole suite of much more human-centric computing services, because we're happy to give up more of our data, because that can be used more effectively to deliver those services to it. And we're going to come to some examples. So with that ability to have implicit trust, with the ability actually to represent ownership of pretty much every type through tokens, with the ability to actually transact using internet sovereign money, sort of super low friction and a digital money that is native to this new economy, and with the ability to use all of those together to provide incentives and to coordinate people at scale, that's how we're going to deliver on this next wave of human-centric services. So where are we with all of that? So Bitcoin, I guess, was more than an experiment, more than a proof of concept. It seems to have found a position as a store of value that continues to unfold. So that's certainly, at least on Twitter, the source of much debate. And then we saw the advent of Ethereum, and Ethereum, woo, more shouts. We could happy for people to take sides, or just whoop. Ethereum has gone out there and created this generalized platform for executing these smart contracts, and seems to be finding perhaps some particular traction around decentralized and open finance, in itself a very exciting and powerful application. And then we believe we're kind of entering this next phase where there are a lot of very significant projects, Cosmos, Polkadot, Augur, very many projects coming live on the Ethereum mainnet, and other alternatives to both Bitcoin and Ethereum, and complements to them that are coming live. Very significant pieces of engineering that weren't dreamt up during the ICO craze and people have hurried away and thrown together a bit of Python and some Visual Basic or something. People have been working on these the fundamental inventions in computer science, coupled with many years of development, and those are going live now. And then on top of that, you've actually got the interest of, Facebook creating its own cryptocurrency. You've got Apple introducing much better crypto primitives to its iOS capabilities, the developer toolkit, and it's respecting the importance of privacy around sign-in through its Apple ID initiative. And then you've also got players like Samsung making it possible to handle private keys in your phone. So we think these are very significant steps that are going to lead to the next wave of applications. But you could say that, look, whilst the total sort of FANGM, whatever acronym you want to use, a market cap of those tech titans is many, many trillions. At this point in time, we've only got $250 billion to play with, and to repeat something that Mike Novogratz said on the stage a year ago, which is kind of more or less the price we've actually returned to as well. That's a year ago on the slide there, or the market capitalization rather than the price, I should say. It takes more than $250 billion to change the world, and so there needs to be more vested interest in this economy. So it is only that much at the moment. So is the problem the applications? So other people have been talking very eloquently about all the different applications throughout the day and these days. And I've already mentioned open finance, and we think that is a super exciting and critical one. Within the developed world, but also very much within the developing world, providing access. Let's leave aside developer tools and infrastructure. Clearly, we can all, pay ourselves to make the building blocks and make the picks and shovels to build this next wave. That's kind of a truism. But there are other areas around autonomous vehicles. There are very critical areas about sharing data around healthcare for pharmaceutical companies that are very exciting. Just jiggling that a little bit. And the thing to observe in all of those, if you have a situation where there is a lot of data that is owned by many people in a kind of long tail of network participants, and hitherto it has been impossible to coordinate them or encourage them to get them feel comfortable with sharing that to tackle really complex problems like researching the correct diagnosis or correct treatment for cancer, and then diagnosing people at scale. That is a absolutely concrete example. Or we have people in the audience tackling the issues with supply chains, encouraging a more efficient and sustainable supply chain by getting enterprises to share more of their private or commercially confidential data in the right way. So if it has that characteristic, then there's $1 trillion opportunity out there, we would argue. So what is it going to take to break some of this Web 2 hegemony? When you're thinking about a startup, it's important to reflect on the fact that this stuff doesn't happen by accident. We all suffer from rose-tinted spectacles. We kind of look back and go, oh, it just happened. But what actually happens is that, and often the founders, of course, even tell that narrative. They say, yeah, we worked it out, no problem. But actually people look through a number of different options of ways to unseat the incumbents. Is it through using regulation? Is it through just going directly at them with a better mousetrap? Is it somehow kind of stealthily coming in, for example, building an ID for gaming, and then somehow that becomes the new social network or finance platform? And there are new areas, and then there's new value propositions that sit entirely in the crypto ecosphere that are probably a way of building something that will unseat the existing players. But it's tough. And so I think it's actually instructive to think back to what this looked like during the Web 2.0 phase. And there were similar struggles. So who knows John Doerr? A good smattering. So arguably a reasonably successful venture capitalist who was on the board of many famous companies. And there was one particular company that you probably heard of that in the first 4 years of its existence, when it was hemorrhaging cash and it was just actually only 20% of the revenue of its sort of one of its closest competitors, and hadn't cracked the code on its business model and go to market, he was saying this is pretty bleak and they might have to pull the plug and go a different direction. So that was between 98 and 2002 for Google, but yet, obviously, come 2015, it had transformed itself. And in fact, from 98 to 2002, it went from that terrible situation, you could argue, within the space of 2 years, from 2002 to 2004, 5, thereabouts, to $32 billion in market capitalization. So, before it happens, it's much harder to see. SaaS, who recognizes this little logo? Which company? Yeah, Salesforce. So when those guys started out, and they just kind of created a kind of cloud-based, what's a cloud? Context manager for sales reps, which is kind of all the product was initially. People were like, the UI is terrible, and it is totally uneconomic trying to build all of the infrastructure to deliver a SaaS product. This is never going to work. But lo and behold, 15, 20 years later, actually 25% of enterprise revenues for enterprise software it comes by virtue of subscriptions for SaaS software. So it's totally overturned, and I'm sure that's continuing to accelerate at the rate at which you see. Too scary? Who's going to get into a stranger's car? I like my old kind of diesel guzzling, noisy, taxi cab. Whether you love them or hate them, obviously, if we race forward to now, we've got close to $100 billion, unless it's gone down, of market cap between sort of Uber and Lyft, and we would argue, at least, maybe at the expense of shareholders, for the moment, a fantastic service for people. So it can be very hard to see these disruptions before they happen. Another example mentioned before is this trumped-up bookstore. That was how Amazon began. Not only is this a pretty awful UI by today's standards, it's interesting to be reminded of that, but they were taking on very established booksellers with all of the physical distribution for books which are not tremendously high margin. It seemed like a pretty bad idea. But there was an innovation that meant that now we probably have about 1,000 billion reasons to kind of be like Jeff Bezos. It's about 900 billion, the market cap here, so a little bit shy of $1 trillion, but we'll forgive him that. And if that little blip on the left, by the way, that was, you can all see, that was the dot-com boom. And so that is the kind of full gamut of the share price of Amazon. But one crucial thing he did in setting expectations early and trying to tackle this very complex task was to say to his shareholders that I am going to take the profits and reinvest them in building this network. And by doing that, ultimately, I'm going to succeed. And so, if you expect to be able to shout at me or deliver dividends in anywhere like the short term, you're going to be disappointed. So you probably want to get off this train. So that was a very successful thing he did there. And that little trick, that way of getting everybody to share more kind of equally in the kind of future of a complex network like that, is actually at the heart of the way in which these new token economies are being built. And so on the slide, you can see a number of the ways in which economic models have been built around this Web3 wave of computing. Some of them are still straightforward revenue models where you tax volatility, for example, or charge for different services. But many people are now working very hard on what would be a whole kind of like genealogy of different token models that they're combining in order to tackle these very complex networking problems. And one in particular I want to just quickly focus on, because this is at the heart of the question of whether or not we can do better than today's form of capitalism, is the work token. So that's a token where you would buy as an investor or own as a supplier into one of these networks. And by virtue of that ownership, you would have the permission, it's like a work permit, visa, taxi medallion for participating in work within that network. And an example of what that might be would be video transcoding. So has anyone got any idea how this video is getting to the people who are watching it? Or I don't know how many people are watching it, but hopefully there are many all over the world live streaming. So that's done through video transcoding. And one way of that network, when it's being built, needed funding. And so let's just think for a moment about what kind of funding mechanism we would want to build that network. Would we want one that, in terms of information, you get it kind of every now and then on a monthly basis, or would we want one where we could get it on a real-time basis? Would we want one where the governance was actually delegated to a group of possibly unrepresented people, or would we actually like to be stakeholders ourselves within the whole thing? Would we like for this to be an instrument that was locked down at the beginning and extremely hard to change, or would we like it to be fully programmable and customizable for what it is you're wanting to do? Would you like it to be multiple stakeholders? You want to organize everybody and give them an incentive to participate in this network, or do we want to be just the investors, or do we want to involve suppliers and then potentially even users as well? The philosophy around these things, do we want them to be a situation where you have that division fundamentally between shareholders and everybody else, a them and us mentality, or is it one for mutual benefit, if you will, a kind of move towards modern mutualization? Despite the efforts of the unions, and even the efforts of people building societies, capitalism has managed to stomp on a lot of that. I think we can do better. And then ultimately, do we want to have just simple carrot mechanisms, or could we have a little balance of carrot and stick? That's essentially meaning that people who own a token that is native to a network have some skin in the game. So they have to think how to be honorable stakeholders and participants in that network. So there's a comparison, and on the left, you've got a description of an equity share. And on the right, you have the description of a work token, a summary. And we see already, and we can see how all of the great characteristics of equity can be retained, but some better characteristics can now be programmed, if you will, within work tokens, and we can tackle these problems. And those are two concrete examples. There's a very strong player in the centralized transcoding market, and there's a protagonist in the decentralized transcoding market, LivePeer, and that is not investment advice. So it's getting hot in here, as predicted. What we're saying here is that this is an opportunity, it's a time for the pendulum to swing back from extreme forms of capitalism and a central control and authority to something that is more decentralized in its organizational structure and allows for more emergent forms of creativity and governance that comes from the individuals, because ultimately that's the way in which we're going to succeed in what are likely to be continue to be turbulent times. And round about the time that Luca Pacioli was writing his book Summa de Arithmetica, another chap called Leonardo was coming up with this very balanced human being. Please forgive the fact that he's male and naked, but this very balanced citizen, this Renaissance citizen, and Vitruvian man. And we think that we can move forward from here and ultimately end up with a kind of more balanced society and citizenship for Vitruvian crypto citizen, around education, voting, around a form of modern mutualization or collective capitalism, around an involvement in your own personal health and the collective health of society, and one that if we work hard at it, that even if there is automation that we see everywhere around us, and certain types of jobs go away. There can be a safety net created through the sharing of our data and a data dividend, and maybe even a universal basic income, as Andrew Yang would like to propose. Thank you very much.